Welcome to Philanthropy in Action, where we engage philanthropists, activists, students, and the community in discussions on how we use our time, talent, and treasure to make the world a better place. I am Maxim Thorne, and I teach Philanthropy in Action at Yale University. Today's guest is Harry Belafonte, an American hero and philanthropist. Thank you for coming, Harry.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We also have Yale University students as part of our conversation, and I welcome them to the show. Please introduce yourselves, starting with Azad.
Hi, Mr. Belafonte. My name is Azad Amanat. I'm a sophomore here at Yale. I'm originally from Los Angeles, California, and it's really a pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
Nice to be with you.
Hi, my name is Connor Bell. I'm a junior from Lynchburg, Virginia. I'm a history major, and I have a particular interest in public health and global health.
Good to see you.
Hi, Mr. Belafonte. Thank you so much for being here. It's such an honor to have you here. My name is Sessa Nyahtego. I was born and raised in East Africa between Eritrea and Ethiopia, but my family now lives in Los Angeles.
Good to see you.
Hi, my name is Linda Lai. I am a junior history major, and I'm originally from Shanghai, China.
Hi, my name is Robert Jichnicki. I'm a freshman from New York City. I'm majoring in computer science or math, and I'm interested in building robots.
Building robots?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Hi, my name is Carl Chen. I'm a junior studying sociology, and I'm from Oak Park, California, which is outside LA, and I'm interested in social movements.
Great to see all of you. Nice to be with you.
Thank you, students. Harry Belafonte's 1956 album, Calypso, made him the first artist in history to sell more than 1 million albums. He has won both a Tony Award and an Emmy, and he was awarded the National Medal of Arts by President Clinton. He has served as a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador and is the recipient of the Kennedy Center Honors for Excellence in the Performing Arts. He has recently collaborated on a memoir and documentary film chronicling his life. He resides with his lovely wife, Pamela, in New York City. Thanks so much for coming.
It's wonderful to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
So Harry Belafonte, to my mind...
Can you put that together?
Harry Belafonte, to my mind, one of the most inspiring aspects of your life is the way that you have used your time, your talent, and your treasure to change the world and to make it better. In my view, that makes you one of the greatest philanthropists. Do you agree with with that term when we refer to you?
Well, as you described how I've used my life, there is truth to that. I didn't set out to be a philanthropist and to work at philanthropy. For me, what I did and what I do is just a part of the more fundamental aspects of one's humanity. I think we should all be philanthropists or in philanthropy. I think that's part of the generosity of the human spirit, the human soul.
How did you come to that? How did you come to that belief?
By ducking philanthropists. I came to that out of social experience. I was born into poverty, and poverty dictated the way in which I would meet the challenges of life. And my mother was also a victim of poverty. And I watched what she did with nobility and with dignity. And the way in which she met the challenges hugely influenced my take on what I should be doing with my life when I came of age and was able to make my decisions and chart my own course.
But those must have been tough decisions. At the time in which you came of age, which was some turbulent times, how did you get involved, for example, with Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement? I mean, you had a career. You were launching yourself as one of the biggest stars, if not the biggest star in music and on the screen. But this must have been challenging for you.
Well, all of it is challenging. But when I first became aware of the good fortune that was being put before me, the great question for me is, what do I do with this power? What do I do with this inflow of influence and resources and the capacity to have people at least pause long enough to hear what you have to say. And it became quite evident based upon role models and other social experiences that to serve the cause of justice, which was my main goal, the biggest thing about poverty for me was the injustice of it, the crushing, humiliating aspects of daily life, begging your way through each encounter. And that seemed to me to be quite inhumane. My mother's construction to me was never go to bed at night knowing that there was something I could have done to fight injustice, and never engaged myself in that in that confrontation. So from early on, I understood that wherever I saw injustice, my commitment and my task was to resist it, to challenge it, and to change it, no matter how minimal the event might appear to be or how large it might, how large it would reveal itself. And that became a practice, became a pattern, became a habit. So when I made a lot of money, outside of the immediate needs to extricate myself from debt and to put my family into some place of a more balanced social experience, the rest was about how do you change the universe, and how do you use your resources, your talent, the money, the influence, personality, or DNA. How do you put it all into the pot and get on with trying to make the world a better place than the way in which you found it? And that was just my life. I didn't challenge it. I was challenged. But each time I stepped to the plate and people asked for my services or indicated an interest in my services, I easily gave it because I became committed to their cause, to the cause that we all should have been and are still committed to. Philanthropy to me is, it has a class distinction. It has an aura that means it is something that the wealthy do. And most of the time when you look at the way in which philanthropy is administered, I often look at it as somebody buying their right to a greater humanity than they in fact lived. And somehow philanthropy was the way in which those who crushed humanity veiled that fact by just giving to those whom they crushed, giving to those whom they abused. And for me, the idea of philanthropy always carried with it a great suspicion as to what motivates this philanthropy. Once you get past that initial question, I then began to understand the importance of having to encourage philanthropy to invest itself in the issues of justice, so that it became more productive for me to seduce philanthropy to the causes that I felt committed to change, than just to ignore philanthropy and treat it as a class issue and move on elsewhere. It made no sense. And in that context, I began to develop friendships and relationships with fairly powerful people and institutions that showed a great deal of philanthropy, or responded with a great deal of philanthropy. And a lot of them, we wouldn't have achieved many of the things we did had it not been for their intervention. So despite the ambivalence, despite the conflicts, besides trying to wrestle with the definition, I soon got over that, because there's a lot of complicated things to the system of life that we have found ourselves in, both economically and politically. And life is a constant sorting out of how to make this thing work.
Thank you. Let's go to our students. Azad.
Yeah, so when Professor Julian Bond visited us at Yale, we had him come speak to the class, and he mentioned you and your kind of gravitas as a leader and kind of icon during the civil rights movement. And he told one anecdote that was especially moving about how during a march that he was present at, the normal type of hate and cussing and people throwing things was there and was present. And midway through the march, you kind of showed and were there, and people started to recognize and kind of slowed down and kind of halted their kind of attack on the march. And you know, there was this kind of, oh, that's Harry Belafonte here. And I was kind of wondering, how do you deal with this sort of admiration for your image, while at the same time kind of facing this idea of race and this kind of hate that was clearly present there before, but you know, is kind of removed with your celebrity status or kind of position of fame?
Well, celebrity is a terrible virus. It exists on so many levels and in so many ways. And the great question about celebrity is its obvious power. And most people who are touched by celebrity have one of two choices: to self-anoint, to use that celebrity in the service of the acquisition of more celebrity, or to use that celebrity and use that spotlight of celebrity and turn it to focus on something that you think will enhance the needs of the human family. I find that kind of service is far more rewarding than just the acquisition of more material power or more wealth or more celebrity. I find that having been given that kind of recognition and that platform, I was aware that as an artist, I had a capacity to say and to do things that will cause people to linger just a bit longer on any question that might be before them. If a celebrity were handling the manipulation of how to approach that question or how to answer that question. And when I found that there was that space, I found an opportunity to make a lot of noise and to say a lot of things and to lead people to places that might change the way in which I found them.
And how do you interact with those who you clearly see as, you know, having a different sense of race, or in some case a racist mentality, but treating you with a different sort of respect, even though you come from a different background? Or how do you engage those who have this kind of mental blockade in terms of race, and kind of allow your celebrity to work through that sense of hate?
The racist characteristic that evidences itself in America touches everyone. We can measure response by the extent of how this racist view is applied or acted upon. Some people can become very, very cruel, very brutal. They can take human life, rooted in the extent of their passions on their racist belief. Some other people just move through life in a very casual way, accepting that there exists this difference, and that difference will never be bridged. They've already shut the door. So when you come up against racism, you have to not first of all understand the level on which it exists, how is it being applied, and then you can begin to dismantle it based upon the tools you need to help in the process. So that if I meet you and I suspect that you have some racist thoughts lingering, the first thing I approach you with is a smile. And in that fact, if there is such a friendly overture, a lot will be said about how we get on from the men and how you handle that smile. I learned a lot of this from my dealings with Dr. King, the positive encounter. We always meet persons adversarially, because so much of life is filled with adversarial experience. Or you can meet people in a position of adversarial clash or encounter and choose to take the sting out of that adversarial behavior. How do you disarm the enemy? How do you change the paradigm? How do you shift the mood? How do you take all of this to another playing field? And from that point of view, the chessboard of life is hugely fascinating to me, because I will look at something and see that we have lost ground or have come upon a cruel moment. And while I may bemoan the loss and bemoan the results of such a tragedy, my first inclination is then, how do I fix it? How do I beat it? I'm coming back to this because it needs to be dealt with. And then comes that challenge, and then comes the chance to exercise imagination, exercise environmental gifts, to bring things to bear, to just make a difference. And I find making a difference at every level of the human encounter is an important way in which to apply your tools and your gifts. And I can casually pass you by and leave you undisturbed with anything. Or I can pass you by and engage you and inform you with something you may never have known before that might change the way in which you see me or see the life you live. I think it's how we treat the gift of life. If you've given all these things with the word to work, all your senses are alive, your imagination, the capacity to exercise free thinking, to challenge what those who would oppress you would have you believe to be the truth or the only truth or the dogma. All these things are constantly out there. And what a wonderful encounter to be able to just challenge these things yourself and find new solution in new ways. I cannot tolerate conformity. It defies me. Some things should be embraced, but if I conform to a negative set of principles, then I'm encouraging that negativity and enhancing that oppression. My thing is that wherever I see it, I challenge it.
You know, that reminds me of a famous quote. I'm going to paraphrase George Bernard Shaw that said, "Fitting in is death." But the other quote,
Sitting in a what?
"Fitting in is death," George Bernard Shaw.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that I love about your approach to life and why you personally, but also your work, inspires me is this enthusiasm that you show and the humor that you bring to these experiences. And some of these are really tough experiences. And just to drop in another quote, you know, Winston Churchill has a saying that I've also embraced, in which he says, and also because I've made so many mistakes in my own life, that success is going from failure to failure, but with enthusiasm. And that enthusiasm must be part of your makeup, because in some of the stories about reaching out to people to get them to invest in SNCC and to raise money to bail students out or other young kids out of jail who were being arrested, it must have taken its toll on you, and yet you brought with it such a compassion and such a humor. Is that part of your strategy or just part of your DNA?
Both. Let me give you a quick example of an experience that will kind of maybe tell you how I am required to greet life. During the civil rights movement, when we were at some of the most critical moments in our confrontation with the system, it was extremely important that we win the justice system of our country, our government. We win it to our cause. Because the thing that most oppressed us were the laws that existed, the segregational laws, the laws of racial oppression, the laws of denial, the laws that said I couldn't go to this school or that school. And this constant machine of oppression and alienation required that we apply the most powerful weapon we had, which were the tenets and the laws of the Constitution. What did the law say? What did the supreme law say? And although many states practiced segregation, the supreme law, the federal law, the Constitution, had other interpretations. So it was important to us to win those who were the administrators of law, administrators of justice, those who manipulated the language of judgment. And when John Kennedy was president, we waited with great anticipation for who would he appoint at the head of the Justice Department, the most important agency in government for us. And he appointed his brother, Bobby Kennedy. And what little we knew of Bobby Kennedy suggested to us there was not going to be a joyous ride. Very rich, very Irish, very from an environment that had no real evidence of a relationship to people of color or people who were poor. He wasn't a bad fellow, he was just an indifferent fellow. And he wallowed and played in the lives and the indulgences of the rich. And we were poor, and we were alienated, and we were being denied access to justice, and we needed to have his opinion fall in favor with the things we were trying to achieve. And when we discussed the fact that that would be an impossible task, because when he came to the role of Attorney General, he had already been a legal voice for the House Un-American Activities Committee, which is a very cruel agency that did a lot of witch hunting and branded people unpatriotic and villains of our pure order as a society, and were all called communist and things that were considered to be unfavorable titles. And he was part of that machine. He was part of that process. And when he became Attorney General, that's how we saw him. So the point to this story is that, giving you that background, is that Dr. King, in listening to our evaluations and assessment of him, said to us, I've heard everything you've had to say, and very little is challengeable, except that he is the Attorney General, and we need him. And your task is to go find his moral center and win him to our cause. So the mission was more than just how do you manipulate him as the administrator of justice and how he would interpret it. You had to study the man and know more about his humanity and his taste and his social habits and win him through a social encounter that took us off the dime and kept having us relate to one another based upon our social experiences. Well, the truth of the matter is that for those of you who look at the arc of that history, by the end of his life, I don't think there was a voice that was possessed of more moral power and more moral clarity than Bobby Kennedy. Had he lived and had he become the President of the United States, the 21st century would be an infinitely different canvas than the one we're experiencing. So winning him, winning his humanity, helping to cleanse the process for him and for us, to be able to make an exchange that put us into a relationship of mutual joy and mutuality was extremely important. The law and the rest of it became another objective. But we did both. And I think in that context, the nation was enhanced considerably by the fact that Bobby Kennedy, and his brother too in a way, although I often say that history created John Kennedy more than John Kennedy created history. The system and those of us who are activists pushed the Kennedy administration to do things they would not ordinarily have done. The youth in particular, the anti-war movement in Vietnam and women's rights and a lot of host of racial and social issues were just brought to the surface of human experience. We're in the streets, everywhere you went, you came up against this force for change, and the administration had to deal with us. The politics of their own interests were at stake, And we knew this, and we played all these themes as cleverly as we could, as righteously as we could, with as much moral truth as we could summon. And in the end, we prevailed. I have to say to the young people a lot of times, I said, you know, we never lost a battle in the civil rights movement. We didn't win the war. The war is still going on, and it's a huge war. But we never lost a battle. Everything we set out to do, to change laws, to change social perception, to change the way in which women were treated in the South as activists in their own communities, being lawyers. You couldn't get a white or black woman in the South to be a lawyer because the courts had gender impositions that denied them the right to practice law fully. So in that sense, what we did changed the way in which America was thinking, albeit we didn't get to the rest of it with as much enthusiasm and passion as we should have. So now we're trying to pick those pieces up in today's void and see if we can carry on with what we originally set out to do. Sorry for being so lengthy in the answer.
Carl.
So you're saying we never lost a battle, but we're still fighting this war. I just came from a class taught by Bob Herbert, and he was saying how he was painting this very bleak picture of America, kind of, and essentially saying what we need now to kind of fix America isn't incremental reforms, or maybe, or not just incremental reforms, and not just maybe social entrepreneurship, but a full-out social movement like we had in the '60s with the civil rights movement, or with the women's movement, or the labor movement. What do you think about that? Do you think that's what's needed right now? Do you think that's possible to be created again?
I don't even think we have a choice. It's what will be, regardless of what you think. Regardless of what I may think or feel, there are inevitabilities on the way that will just roll over you, because that's the way history treats it. This problem has been in part of civil cycle forever. I mean, when you talk about capitalism and you talk about free capital and the flow of money and trade and internationalism and all that kind of stuff, a certain group rose up that we now see as the capitalist class, or the rich people, and they dominated the economics of our societies. Well, one of the earliest glues to the success of that economic process was the exploitation of human beings. And the first major exploitation here in America of human property, of human energy, was what we did to the Native Americans. Europeans came, they conquered, and they needed cheap labor and a workforce, and they conscripted Indians to fall in, and under slave traditions forced them into extinction as a people, because they just so cruelly treated them as cheap labor, as commodity, and not with a humanity. And when they ran out of that group and they were extinguished, or at least removed in a great totality, they went out and imported the next group of wage earners and workers, and that was slavery. And they had a century of that with black people: cheap, no value, no human value, no worth, morally deficient. And when that system played itself out to as much as it could and had to be changed, it then instituted its next set of rules, which was segregation. And there you had divided and conquered to keep people still in that cheap labor, into that useless place of life, because the rich determined who you were, and what you were to be called, and how you endured. Now, jump to today. What fascinates me is that in the 20th century, and certainly in the dawning of the 21st century, we saw huge upheavals. We saw the Soviet Union and the communist Russia implode. Now, everybody thought that if that dynasty, if that power were to at all be eradicated, it would be in the midst of bloodshed and tyranny and great tragic forces clashing and nuclear war. But it came and went without a shot being fired. Somebody can say, well, that's a coincidence to history. But then you say, okay, let's change the environment. Let's change the scenario. Let's go to a place where the issue is race, not economic oppression, but race. And here in South Africa, you had the largest population of Africans, black Africans, being exploited by a European minority very cruelly with apartheid. And everybody expected when Africans got free, they would just destroy white people in an act of vengeance. But the truth of the matter is, the society transformed, and not a shot was fired. And people began to find ways in which to integrate and come together, because those systems no longer worked. They imploded. They died out of their own cholesterol. Then you look at so many other things. And what fascinates me about America is we sit with some sense of arrogance, with the fact that there go those empires, there go those extreme forces, and we're the only ones left. And what's happening? We are imploding. We are in a crisis that is unique to all other crises, at least in our time. The economic collapse we're looking at is because the system just doesn't work. And now it has nobody to blame. It's running on its own juice. And the more it does, the more it fails. And whether it's what's going on Wall Street, and whether it's the way in which they've run off with the Treasury, and whether they're making laws and rules that further oppress, you see, I think, that system in a dying stage, in a dying phase. And what's coming in is that force which will replace whatever that system will be replaced with. And hopefully, it'll be the sanity that comes from an active citizenry, people who have a great sense of the common humanity, and will help turn Occupy Wall Street, or Occupy New Haven, or Occupy whatever, because that's what it is. Now, people can have a rather, interesting intercourse with intellectual debate, and try to find reason and rhyme and contain these things in ways that are not applicable. But the fact is that these things happen. When the civil rights movement came into being, we were considered dirty people, mindless, wasteful, pariahs, people who suck off the state. We were all those things. And yet we changed the nation, and we changed the value system of the country. Not successfully, not completely, but successfully. And these were the battles that were being fought. The war is still there, and we're coming back now with a new energy. And that puts a lot of this squarely on your plate. Because you mentioned Julian Bond before. He was younger than you when we met, and in the movement. Julian was 20. John Lewis was 18. Diane Nash, who led a lot of SNCC in the movement, was 17 and a half years old with child. And they were all on campuses around America and studying all the things they were doing, but they abandoned that part of their social experience and engaged in the issues of social change. And they did a hell of a job. And now the ball's in your court. Your turn. What do you got for me?
Carl?
No, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. I think now the question is, I was reading, I think an interview you did with The Root on, you gave some opinions on Occupy Wall Street. And I was thinking now, and especially just listening to Bob Herbert, he was saying how all these movements accomplished a lot, but they ultimately flamed out. And in wanting to start maybe a more sustainable movement, what do you think is like the first thing, or what are some of the things that we should really focus on?
I think if you really look at the way in which justice is administered, you'd find that the first thing that's really in need of repair, everybody needs a job, we should have work and fair wages and fair employment and all that stuff. But there's an underlying essence that's hardly ever discussed, and it's justice. Because it is how justice reveals itself in the midst of these efforts that ultimately tells you what kind of a course are you on. Now, it is mind-boggling to me that there should have been men with great power who stole the national treasury in the tune of trillions of dollars that cannot be found, that cannot be reclaimed. And when it came time to look at justice and how to stop this insanity, those who repaired the moment left the very same people who did all this mischief in the same seats of power and decision-making without any discussion or debate and answers to the nation. How is it possible that we can still be sitting here having decisions made at this very moment by the very same people who stole the treasury just yesterday and were the same thugs, the same villains, the same corrupt forces? How do they prevail? And what is it in the public discourse, in the protection of public policy, that makes us all capitulate to that, to let us accept it? Where's the protest? Where's the resistance? Who is that says, oh, hold on, you guys can't go any further. Let's discuss this problem, because they're preparing for your next demise. They haven't changed at all. What they're looking at is what they think were the mistakes they made, and now they're fixing it so those mistakes will not be repeated. They'll create new ones. And how do they do that? You've got a Supreme Court that's locked against justice. It's a court that's locked to an ideology, and that ideology has undermined justice all the way. So if you change the checks and balances that were created by the Founding Fathers in order to keep the machine of government active and creative and thinking and protecting the populace, and once that's dissolved, you get the Congress. Now the Republicans control the House. They're on their way to try to control the Senate. Those two, which were watchdogs for each other, now become one ideology. They wrap up with the executive branch because the President of the United States has not used his bully pulpit to move justice along. He's been politically fanciful in the way he's manipulated the system from a political, but the villainy still prevails. How do you challenge that? How do you make it not so? And I think all these things are being ignored, or people are being distracted. But if you don't look at what happens to justice, if you look at Homeland Security, the law that is the law of the land, any one of us sitting in this room could leave this room or not even leave the room. Two guys could walk in here and command any one of you, overwhelm you, take you out to a car, whisk you away, and the world will never hear from you again by the approval of law. You don't get charged because they don't have to charge you with a crime, don't have to tell you what you did. You have no right to a lawyer. You have no right to one phone call. Absolutely nothing. And the law says we can do that. And that law was passed. And when Barack Obama became the President of the United States, he inherited that law. And in his campaign, he denounced that law. So my problem with him isn't whether he gave the bank $700 billion or not. My problem with him is, where is your moral center? Where is your line? How can you look at this injustice that prevails as part of the law of the land with your power as the presidency to change it? You don't need the Congress to change it. Ultimately you do. But certainly in these early stages, you could, with the stroke of executive order and a pen, change some of this, challenge some of it, awaken the public to the fact that these laws, but he doesn't do that. So we sit in this moral vacuum. We sit in a place where nobody leads us to the higher order or to the greater truth. So we sit here dealing with all these things in these sub-issues, in these subterranean ways. We're busy watching what's in the mousetrap while somebody else is running off with the entire wedge of cheese.
Harry, I want to take you back to a startling moment in the history of civil rights, and it's a moment that you helped create. I was looking at the internet, looking on the internet, and there is a clip of an interview of which you're a part, and it talks about the leaders, people who led various parts or various contingents to the March on Washington. And in that clip, there is you, Harry Belafonte, there's Sidney Poitier, James Baldwin, Charlton Heston, Marlon Brando, Mankiewicz, and the interviewer. And it's an incredibly diverse group of people that you were very instrumental in putting together as a bridge builder, and because they're not necessarily the people you would think would come together in the way that you brought them together. And this is important to me personally because there was a similar, but obviously not identical, March on Washington that Julian Bond and I participated in. And this was...
Selma?
No. I'm too young to be in Selma. But this was the Marriage Equality March in 2000.
He's playing the race card. All black people look young.
I really am young. But this was the Marriage Equality March in 2009.
Okay.
And what was fascinating about this is that part of the challenge was how do you build a bridge between the African American community and gay rights, which has been a wedge issue. In fact, recently we hear of people actually conspiring to create wedges between blacks and gays and so forth. And one of the things that I think we were able to achieve and make history is that we got the chairman of the NAACP, Julian Bond, and I introduced Julian Bond at this March on Washington, to be the keynote speaker of the LGBT Rights March on Washington. That was a powerful moment, but it's something that you did, 40 years before that. How did you achieve that collaboration and that bridge building, and what can we learn from that today?
Well, I think one has to look at the sector that you're talking about. All those people that you mentioned were high-profile artists. They had more than commanded respect in their space in their triumphant use of their gifts as artists. And I firmly believe, it is my belief then and now, that artists are really the gatekeepers of truth. Our mission and our purpose as existing entities is to use the gift of art to paint a picture for our universe or the members of our universe to be inspired to see themselves in a higher realm, in a higher order. And that artists do that. We inscribe history. We did all the drawings on the cave walls. We wrote all the Qurans and the Bibles and the ancient sayings. We were the ones that tooled those letters into stone. We were the ones that created the songs and all the imagery. And art was always been the carrier of the history of human evolution. And we have a capacity to, in revealing the truths of life and to move people to an inspired place to see life in terms larger than we experience, has been the one entity that all empires feel the need to conquer. If you look at the church, almost everything that is influential about the church and all the churches is the way in which the temples have been made and ordained, and the way the colored glass windows tell you stories, and the way in which Mozart wrote all the great symphonies and the great masses and what. And you listen to it, when you walk into these temples, you're being overwhelmed with the art that validates that point of view, that philosophy. And when I looked at these young men, because the charge to me was to organize my community, to organize the cultural forces. And I had to appeal to those artists who understood that they were the gatekeepers of truth, and that their power, if they chose to use their lights collectively, could be a huge beacon in looking for how to change America. And it worked, because when I called all these people you just mentioned and others, their presence alone forced people to stop and to listen and to think. because we've already invaded their inner place. We're already in their psyche. We're already in their living rooms. We were in their kitchens. We were in their bedrooms. They were listening to our songs. They made love to our songs. They marched to our songs. They loved to come to our movies and be influenced by how we did what we did. We're a huge force already out there. And now this collective force comes and says, let's pause for a moment and look at the deeper truth of our society. And they carried a huge payload in just having their presence there. I'll never forget when they all mingled with the people on the mall. Citizens just absolutely were aghast, not aghast, but overwhelmed with the fact that Marlon Brando is walking with Beulah from Mendenhall, Mississippi, and they're laughing and breaking bread together. It was an untouchable moment. And yet all these things all of a sudden affected the way people were thinking and looking and listening. And I think the use of celebrity in that sense was what you saw in the film, and the use of that celebrity was constantly applied, whether it was Selma to Montgomery. We did it in what happened when we filled the courtrooms of America with our presence, influencing juries and judges with our esteem to say, here is what we think. And a lot of times things landed in our favor. But it's how there's also an abuse of that celebrity. And there are a lot of guys who are very visible, who are very, very successful, and who really in the final analysis have not left very much that's worthwhile in the wake of their inordinate success and power. They don't make any pictures that help the human heart sing or dance. They don't help us see each other in more profound ways. They don't help us get a deeper insight into what we should be doing as people. As a matter of fact, most of what they do is quite destructive because it's always pictures of violence and suspicion, and it's always evil overcoming justice. And the guy who is always the hero is always smitten with a lot of evil in his character. But it's also the way in which the system has co-opted culture and has used culture to service it, because the dilemma that the nation faces in this culture, in this economic collapse and this social collapse is very evident in the arts, because we are also in a cultural collapse. We're at the lowest ebb of American cultural power. The way our songs are, the way our voices are, the books that are written, the things, the way in which we've engaged culture is really at an all-time low. And I think if that changes, a lot will be changed in the social rhythm, our social vision of one another. It's an amazing thing to have at our disposal.
Connor.
Thank you. So I hope that my question piggybacks a little bit off of Carl's. In studying the history of the civil rights movement, one of the things that I think often gets talked about is the window of opportunity that came up during the 60s for change. And some of the things that is often talked about that go into that are the relationships built between people living in poverty and a direct line to the federal government through New Deal policies, Great Society policies, the so-called war on poverty. And I was wondering, based on the conversation that we just had, whether you believe that this direct line still exists today, if it's still there or narrowing, closing?
I don't think that direct line still exists. The path to its resurrection and to get that back on course, I think, is critical to the choices that will be made, not only in this election, but in how we manipulate governance in the immediate future. I think, government is, as abstract as we try to make it, it's really quite tangible. It's made up of men and women who come from the communities that we know. And what this apparatus, this mechanism does is that It's a selective process. We move with groups of people towards protecting certain interests, which more often than not rely on self-interests. And if a particular power within the social norms gravitate towards one another and seizes that power, then they seize the process. So right now, for instance, most of the banks and most of the Wall Street and most of the things that the court did in saying no transparency, you can give endless money to causes, will make a huge shift in the way in which there's a true democratic representation of what we will hear. That will have a continued impact on the fact that they're drawing away all the tools of support, all the humanities, all the things that we thrived on as a nation to ensure that citizens who were in need would never be in dire need, that we'd always be there and to be generous and to be giving. Everything that attracted the world at large to want to come to America is in jeopardy. I think people always saw America as fair. People always saw America as the place that was campaigning in behalf of justice or on behalf of good. And now that has been seriously blurred. And in that blurring, what it has done is taken away the humanity from the nation. And the humanity is expressed from a legislative perspective in how do we take care of health? How do we take care of how our children are being informed? What price can you put on that? There should be no price on education. As a matter of fact, it should be a human right, a civil right, a social right, and that everybody has the right to education with never a concern about how they will pay for it. And the same thing about health. If you surrendered everything else and just said we have the right to free speech, the right to health, and the right to education, almost everything else will take care of itself. And these things always come out of what is dismissed by others as a kind of social philanthropy, which is not to the best interest of the nation because it creates beggars, it dampens enthusiasm, it dampens creativity. Well, some of the greatest experiences America has ever had was at the height of its social generosity. If you take a look, just from the point of view of culture, if you take a look at the 1920s and the 30s when the WPA was in, and they gave money to the local communities to have art classes and dance classes and literature and to study, this tremendous reward and harvest of culture from actors and playwrights and books and Faulkner and Hemingway and Steinbeck and all the great forces that wrote to social truths, inspired the nation and the best that was in us. And somebody came along one day and said, enough of that. We should stop feeding that crowd. We should now exploit this harvest. And when capital moved in and commanded the cultural turf, because they did, art is not controlled by artists. It's controlled by those who put a price on commodity, because we are a commodity. If you don't get the sponsor to approve of you to be in a TV show that he says will be made and created in the images that he wants, then we're back into a period where we don't have objectivity. We don't have multiple voices saying things. We have no contradictions. And I think when we stamped out subsidy to the humanities, we stamped out a big part of the American heart, the American soul, because turning around to pull our neighbor up has always been the image of who we are. The thing that made slavery work, at least be dismantled in the final analysis, were not just the fact that black Africans seized their moment and courageously went into overthrowing slavery, but there was a huge armada of abolitionists and people who had another humanity that came with enormous philanthropy and giving and a basket of goodies to help change. And that change gave us a higher society, a higher order in which to exist. But the enemy never, ever sleeps. Never. the minute we catch a moment and change the game, they move instantly to find the counter change. And they eventually win. Where we are right now, in our own space in this country, those guys on the opposition side had a 40-year plan. They weren't just looking at the election for the next 2 years or the next moment and the dog catcher. They're busy saying, how do we take this whole thing over? And it takes time and patience and resources and cunning. So that in time, we lost the court. In time, we lost the Congress. In time, we lose the executive chair and all that it should represent. All that they need is time to have their, while the rest of us are down here groveling with these insane little ideas and these little minuscule things that are not really about the real game. We're not in it. How can we be in a war that has lasted longer than any encounter this nation has ever had in an act of hostility, and nobody pays attention? Nobody cares. Nobody gets the latest statistic out of Afghanistan or what's going on, and we don't really care. As a matter of fact, if we could just hurry up and get out of there, most Americans wouldn't care if that part of the world went to hell in a basket. We'd have lost all sorts of moral balance, all sorts of analyses that are important to human uplifting and existence. And I make that claim for us because that's what we said we were. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Well, that's not very abstract, is it? It's very specific. I mean, you could have fixed the gender use of just men, but in truth, that's what America's about. That's what it pumped into all of us. That's what made us who we are. That's what gives us the diversity that sits right here at this moment on this campus, trying to push ourselves through this labyrinth of stuff being thrown at us and trying to find the answers. And the first thing I think we have to find is, where is our humanity? Not where's your next job, not where's your next paycheck, not where's your next occupation. As important as that is something far more fundamental. Where's your soul? What really is where's your moral center? What do you really hold to be self-evident? What is your truth? Get that in place, everything else will work, I think.
Sesson.
Well, I want to thank you again for being here and meeting with us. And my question is about the documentary Sing Your Song. I believe your daughter, Gina Belafonte, was very much involved in creating this documentary. And in an interview during the Sundance Film Festival, she said it was very important to her that she preserved your legacy and the legacy of those who worked so closely with you during the civil rights movement. And I was just wondering if you felt a sense of responsibility to share with the world the stories of your peers and their contributions to the Black movement and other humanitarian causes.
I guess it was a responsibility, but I never saw it as a responsibility. I really didn't. Still don't. I saw it as a way of life. I just don't know how to do it any other way. Nobody has ever had as much fun with a career than I've had. I really mean that. I mean, I woke up one day and I sang a little song that came from a little village in the mountains of Jamaica. Day-o, day-o. And I woke up one day and the whole world is singing that song. And I walked out and said, my God, everybody's singing my song. Now what do I do? Now what do I say? What do I do with this audience that looks upon me so favorably? And all I could think about was how to lead them to the things that gave me joy, the joy of diversity, the joy of each other. And I'm not religious, so let's not make any great statements about my spirituality. My spirituality exists, but I service that in a whole other way than what the norm would have you think. And I just think that it wasn't a responsibility; it was a way of life. And the fact that others see it as, if you're responsible for something, it means you have to make an effort to go out and do it. But it's no effort for me. I didn't lose anything. As a matter of fact, I gained so much, it's almost vulgar. I once said to a friend of mine in Beverly Hills, who had a big house, black guy, and looked at me and said, "Oh man, you gave up so much. You sacrificed so much for us, brother. I mean, you really did. You just stepped to the plate and look what happened." And I looked around the room for whom else he could have been talking to, because what happened? What happened? Well, man, you know, your career took a hit. You didn't this, you didn't. I said, my career took a hit. You wake up every morning and talk to your agent, and you're always on the same subject. How well did you do at the box office? I wake up every morning, I talk to Nelson Mandela, and we talk about who got shafted here, who got something to hang on to, who got a reward that's not equatable. I mean, and I didn't go look for Mr. Mandela. I did write him when he was in prison, because I felt that was the thing I needed to do. And to get him out of prison became just part of what my daily menu was dealing with injustice. Later on, a thing happened I never expected. I never thought he'd come out of prison. I never thought I'd see him. But then I was rewarded with that moment. I looked at it and I said, what a way to spend your life, man. Look, you're hugging Madiba. And he's out here making noise and making other, wow, what a way to go. And somebody saying, I weep for you? Well, okay. We need water, but so give us all you got. But somebody's not seeing this in the proper context. Somebody's not seeing this in the way it should be perceived. I'm having fun. I'm having fun watch the enemy retreat bloodlessly.
Linda?
You mentioned so much about your talent, about singing, about being able to use your talent to give to people joy. And a part of that talent is, you know, being able to put things that are in reality into the realm of imagination. And you've done that in philanthropy as well. To be able to lead a civil rights movement, you need pure imagination to be able to imagine a world without this injustice. And you've mentioned a lot about domestic issues. I was wondering, what is a world that you imagine for global citizens, for people even in the United States to be able to look beyond their borders and to help the people in the international sphere?
I think the greatest opportunity that's been put through modern civilization was yet another attempt to arrive at a forum where there could be the Council of All Nations, of all people, to sit and to have the most important thing we have experienced as a species, and that is the right to sit in a forum and to convince each other of each other's beauty, of each other's choices, and to compete in that sense. We used to do it territorially, walk and club somebody over the head, take their village, take their turf, take their women, take their everything, and in that might and power we saw the growth of civilization. It's really something else. And the United Nations, for me, always said, wow, here's another chance with modern technology and how quickly we can communicate. This forum is where we should be having our greatest renaissance, having our greatest time. And the forum still exists in its physical design. The enemy and money and power has constantly made it the tool of least choice. They're always saying, oh, the United Nations isn't about anything, it's just self-serving. What does that mean? It serves a self, but we're all in the United Nations to serve self and to serve interests. Is to iron out whose interests harms who and whose joy is celebrated by who. It's a place in which you don't just buy and sell each other. It's not a trade. It's not a trade fair. You don't go in and just negotiate the new price of wheat. It's the human soul, human beings, and we have yet to let that humanity emerge the way in which it should. But I think it's survived up to now because that humanity is tenaciously knocking at the human door to say, let us in, let us become part of your daily debate. Let's become part of your analysis. And I think, if I am to make a reach here, that the next paradigm, the next real joy on the horizon is where women will take this. I think there is a thing going on here that says all of this now lands at the doorstep of the choices that women will make, because I think men have run out of the options for their evil. And the only thing that can help us is the generosity of the spirit of women coming at the table and talking about life and healing and all the things we dismiss them for, because you're the weaker sex and all those little things we throw around, you know, the stupidity of it. But I think it's just something we just have to make part of our popular vocabulary. And, you know, big deal. It isn't there's no one thing that's going to come. I don't think there's going to be some miraculous revelation from the heavens and a voice will come forth and pronounce us all whatever we think we need to be. It's going to come from ant-like daily encounter and bumping into one another, creating and growing and building and being able to make the selection between that which should survive because it's good and that which should be left to nurture the rest of life because it's going to decay. Does that make any sense to you?
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Robert.
Well, I just wanted to thank you again for joining us today, Mr. Belafonte. And I wanted to take the discussion in a slightly different direction. In our class discussions, we've talked a lot about how social entrepreneurs often choose to invest in individuals more so than they even invest in causes. We've also talked about how sometimes opportunities arise that we instantly know we want to support. And like in a New York Times interview, you said that you're driven largely by a sense of rebellion, even anger sometimes, and with the causes you choose. But you've also had the opportunity to work with amazing, influential individuals who you've supported. Where do you think you find the balance between supporting individuals and causes?
I have a propensity for supporting individuals who embrace my causes. It's rather narrow, rather self-serving, but one of the miracles of my journey is that when I look at all the people that have really shaped history, every one of them that are in my life experience called me and invited me to come into their space to become engaged in what they did. Eleanor Roosevelt, to me, is the greatest woman ever in my time, in my lifetime. What she was, and what she did, and the way in which she did it. But in these invitations that were extended, I walked in, and I was curious as to what specifically did they want me to do. And most of the time, what they asked me for was to use the power of my art to service some specific need. Eleanor Roosevelt had a lot of interest in humanity and the welfare of children. The human rights manifesto that she helped design and create led us to the Declaration on the Human Rights of the Child. It was her influence that created these documents, which incidentally, the human rights of the child is America is the only nation in the world that has never signed that treaty. Every other nation has come to the table and signed. America refuses, which says a lot about the decay of our own sense of mission. But in every instance, it was what was asked of me. I never had to impose anything. And they unlocked my sense of creativity. What can I best do to make this thing happen? And to service this cause, which I have never thought about before or never thought I would engage. So it was this reciprocity. They called, I answered. And they forced me to examine in my toolkit what tools could I best use to apply to the ends they wanted us to achieve. And always the thing that nourished that was that I always trusted them. I trusted their vision, I trusted their view, I trusted their humor, I trusted their humanity. and therefore I could throw myself in without any concern for consequence. Because even if we were to die, one of the great glories in death and all that stuff was really the fact that look who I'm dying with. You know, if I got to close my eyes and the last thing I see is Dr. King or you know, then what a way to go. It's just everything about it said to me, I'm in the best place I can be. And everything that I did serviced that fact. I'm amazed at the age of 85 in America, with all of our value systems, I'm able to sit here at Yale University and talk to a bunch of young people that I never ever saw before and may never see again, but that they're interested in my opinion is, to me, I can't put a value on that. That's as touching and as meaningful to me about how my life has been spent than the fact that this moment carries some value for you. Don't get no better than this. It really doesn't.
Thank you. Thank you, Harry Belafonte, for never in my wildest imaginings would I think that you would share a few bars of Deo with us.
Deo.
And for the wisdom that you brought to the class. And thank you, students, for joining in this most inspiring conversation with who I believe to be one of the world's greatest philanthropists. This has been Philanthropy in Action. You know, Harry Belafonte shared with us that moment in which the entire world was singing his song, Deo. And he thought, how could I use that moment to make the world a better place? And he did. And he talks about how we actually find our moral center and how we make that decision about whether we are invested in making money or in the moment that he said when he wakes up and he can speak to Nelson Mandela. And we are so privileged here today that we could wake up today to speak with Harry Belafonte. And there is no greater privilege that I can imagine. Now, what are you going to do to change the world?